This is Nina Lockwood. Welcome to Get Your Happy Back. Stories and insights that will inspire you to find new sources of happiness in your own life. Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are when you're listening to this. This is Get Your Happy Back, and today I get to talk to Karena de Souza, who I've known for a while, but she has a very, very interesting path that she's carved out for herself. So, Karena, I'm going to just turn it over to you to explain to people what you do and how you do it and how you've managed the transitions that you've gone through over the years.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Nina. Like you said, we've known each other a while. I think you have a core part of my branding or my understanding of myself as I was trying to figure out what I want to do next in my life. Um, I am a future of work specialist. I'm a futurist, and I talk to uh, I use the term it anyone from 16 to 60 about the future of work and how to adjust. But over time, I've come to carve out a kind of specific niche. I aim at Generation Z, who are the vanguard generation that's dealing with this new world of work. And I also speak to parents about the skill set that this particular generation needs that is quite distinct and different
Mm.
from the skill set that we needed to succeed when in the future of work, sorry, in a industrial era career model. Um, One thing that was quite interesting over the recent past, I'd say, is I find myself speaking more and more to parents of kindergarten um, students. And I was like, why do they
Starting
need?
early, right?
I know. And what it was a Harvard professor said it to me quite nicely. She said, what you're trying to do is you need to get to parents whilst the child still listens to that mummy voice. And it's like the things that we hear when we're young. So I have this phrase, the voice you hear in your ear when you're 15 echoes in your head when you're 50. So when your parent is like clear across the Atlantic, as mine was, and I'm sitting there trying to adjust my hair and she's nowhere in the room. That is the kind of thing. It's like the expectations that we as parents place on our children subliminally, if you like. If the parents have that opportunity to frame the way a young person thinks early on, I think that makes a huge difference, a distinct difference.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the future of work, it is so dramatically different from the past that a lot of us are having to make a transition. The world of work, or the world of the industrial model was one of scarcity, of, one-upmanship, of, one person owns everything. That was the model. Whereas the world of intelligence is one of abundance and the ability to take chances and take risks, which was quite almost a dramatic difference. And the toolkit you needed in the industrial model is not necessarily the one you need in the future of work.
And
And
you're
where this,
calling this current stage that we're in the intelligence
yeah,
model?
I
Is that
don't
what
think
you call it?
yeah, I'm calling it the intelligence era. Also has attention era. It's so early on that we haven't actually settled on a name for it yet. Just very much like, Gen Z was the iPhone, iGen for a long time. So I
Right.
think some of the naming conventions take a while to settle and find their space in society. So I don't quite know what we're going to be calling this one, but it's very clear that it's about data, it's about information. So information age is another one that you'll hear used a lot. But what it really does come down to is the way we work is now completely different.
Did you
And
experience that for yourself? When
uh,
you were making a transition, you were in the financial industry and
yeah.
then you shifted gears. And what prompted that?
It was less my career and more my children's path. So at the time, my
Mm.
children were making their late high school choices. And, at the point where as a parent, you're helping them guide their career choices in university. Like, are you applying for engineering or are you applying for accounting or are you applying for, well, I was in that mode. But at the same time, I was consulting on the future of money. And a really interesting thing happened here in Canada. So we don't have as many banks as they have in the US. They're not as many regionally. We have a few major national banks. And one of them, this was after 2008 when we'd had that huge recession. And so I'd been keeping an eye on stock prices and little things like that, that are on the periphery of my vision. And one of the banks laid off over 2,000 people. And I thought, oh, here comes the next wave, you know, and their stock price went up. And I'm like, okay, does not compute, right? It's like you lose so many people, your stock price should be going down. And I dug deep, deep, and I found out that they'd taken on 200. So they'd laid off 2,000, maybe 2,500 bank tellers, people right across the country, and used those funds to bring in about 200 IT people. And if you peg 2014, that was the beginning of when we have the phone apps on our phone, and
Mm-hmm.
you see the move into more technology in the world of finance. So basically, my radar, my signals, I started picking up on things, and I realized that the job I was shoving, I'm going to use the word shoving my child into, which I thought was like, like I'd grown up on Wall Street. It's like, I think it's a pretty solid career path. And I realized that this might not be as risk-free as I thought it might be. And so that's when I started paying attention, but it became more than that. It became, okay, if this can go, what else can go? And I started then delving deeper and deeper into this very nascent market called the future of work way back in 2014. And you began to realize that concepts like robotics and concepts like AI could potentially, I'm going to say at that point in time, just, shove us a little bit in a different direction. Didn't like it would take a while for me to figure out how big this change was going to be. Um, but what it was really bothering me was my role as a parent. It's like, as a parent, you kind of came in with a game plan. You had your if you didn't have your own um, you know, plan for how to play, like how to get into the right school, how to get into the right, uh organizations, et cetera, et cetera, you were borrowing somebody else's. But there was a playbook. And the conventional wisdom said, if you follow these rules, you have a decent chance of ending up in the middle, in a solid middle class career. And that seemed to be like literally dissipating from beneath me. And I was like, what weird question. It might play into your podcast. I'm like, I started questioning, like, who am I as a parent? If I cannot guide my child, where's my value anymore?
So
It's
your
selfish.
value, no, this is really an interesting point that you're making because for many of us, as we get older and we're asking ourselves what's next after a certain length of time in a career or many careers, that what you did was instead of really, and I may be wrong, so you'll have to correct me if I am, but instead of really saying, what do I do next for my professional next step, your focus changed to your role as a parent, and that became the primary driver.
Hmm.
So I'd love you to speak to that a bit more. Most women are not, I think what your shift was unique. Most women are thinking, what do I do next to get to this place from where I am now? But it seems like your transition was much more organic because you began to see the writing on the wall and there was a need that you recognized. So it was much a more of a different process. It sounds
Primal.
well,
How
yeah,
do I protect my young?
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it was a different process, but I think I was particularly blessed in that that was also my career. Like, that was also my field of play. It's like the future. So I, I suspect I had more tools available to me and a better research focus to, to pivot from future of money, which was very tangible, to this broader concept of future of work.
And
Um,
future of people.
Future people, and I'll if you want, I'll get to actually a particular essay that I wrote on that topic because I ended up doing a bunch of keynotes on that very topic. Um, it's how do I start off with this? Yeah, it wasn't so much I use this phrase like every single area of my focus comes from pulling on a thread my kids have left hanging off a sweater or something, right? It's like, they drop these little tidbits all over, and I'm like, and I go in like, I need to know more about this. And next thing I know, I'm in a whole different phase of life. So yeah, I guess that was my transition. And but it was primal. It was like, what do I have, or what can I know that as a parent of adult children, or soon to be adult children, now mine are adult, you evolve from this stage of caretaking and custody to this stage of consulting, right, as a parent. And I kind of had that sense. My children are I'm the eldest child, and my kids are the eldest grandchildren. So in some ways, I'd seen this happen in other families. I'd watched that pattern. But in our family, it was really raw and fresh and new. And like I had no role model to go to and say, okay, this is how you navigate this space. Um, but it is challenging. It's like, I've got, if ever you go into my Substack, I've got this one essay called Mother of Dragons. And there's a phrase in there like, who am I? Who am I once this biological part of my life is ended, right? Who am I once I've given birth, once I've raised these children, once they've flown? Who am I? And I think that's probably a core theme that a lot of your listeners also resonate with.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is, it used to be, yes, you're that, you then become a griot, you then become this person who tells the tales, you then pass on the wisdom, and then you die. And that is still true. However, when you die is now distinctly longer in life. So I've got this reality of, and then I die, but that's gonna be like another 50 years from now. It's like, it's there's a decent chance I've got my whole working life equivalent to still carry on living.
Ahead of you, right.
Right. And so my choice is, what do I do with that? Do I carry on just sitting on the couch and waiting to die? Do I like, blend myself into a corner? Do I become part of the furniture? Or do I figure out a way to help this transition? And so I'm going to use the word transition because that's what I've chosen to be a really central pillar to my work. So I think there are a couple of ways my work distinguishes itself in the future of work now industry from a lot of other people. The first is that I actually focus on parents. So what I realized in 2014 is that the entire universe of parents sending their kids to university were parents like me, parents who were raised in the industrial model, who did what their parents told them to do, who understood that there was a value in this middle class society that they were going to be part of, and who through the North American education system were largely funding their kids' education. That was slightly different from their parents. So even though their parents might have supported them when they were in university, I think in today's moment, parents are providing a lot of that tuition. And so what I was noticing was parents holding a large sense of influence over what their children did in university. And in many cases, it was, if you don't do what I tell you, I will not fund you. And I don't know if you were on that pulse, but like my children were in high school at the time, and I was beginning to see this dramatic rise in mental health issues, including suicide. And one in particular triggered me terribly because it was my daughter, it was one of my children's last year. It was midterms. Canada has a slightly different education system from the US, so you don't have the SATs, but your end of year marks or your midterm marks will kind of gauge whether you got into the university you were aiming for. And this kid clearly did not. And he was an only child, and he went home and he hung himself. And that stuck with me. Like, I could not imagine that you can come into school, pick up your marks, and then make this decision. And I then made it my mission, because at that point I was still doing Future of Money and just, chatting to my kids' friends about what I thought the future of work was going to be. I made a decision that whether it was for money or not, I would go out and start talking to parents, because this is not the choice I'm sure that they would have wanted for their child. If they had known that the university you get into does not matter, the degree you do does not matter, that the future of work is going to be so dramatically different in what it values from the industrial past. And so that's when I launched Full Term into like talking to parents. So that's one core pillar. the other was, as I started exploring what this future of work would be, to me, I started seeing a parallel to the transition from the agricultural era into the industrial era.
Hmm.
Um, I have a weird mind, I got to tell you. So bear with me a second. I started like collapsing it down and I started saying, okay, so what are the things that are not going to be true? So if I say to my child, and I started off with the most obvious thing that that you should not say to a kindergartner, which is when you grow up and get a full-time job with a pension plan, you'll be okay. All right. And this was my worry. It's like if I tell my child this is what you're supposed to aim for, like go work for a bank, you'll have a pension plan, or you go work for the government, you'll have a pension plan, you'll be set for life and you'll be happy. And then they turn 50 and the work world does not look like that. And I'm not around to guide them. It's like this is the model that they're working towards. And so to me, it was like this is the mental health crisis that is looming for the 50, like an 18-year-old when they're 50. Is the diabetes of the future. And how can I today make a difference in that conversation? And so I said, one thing is we retrain our own speech as parents and as individuals as to what our expectations are. So work for money doesn't necessarily become the end game. It's work for satisfaction, work for what gives me a sense of peace that I've made a difference, right? So that was one major thing for me. The other was like, there's no pension plan. There are like, everyone's in a gig working environment. Like I saw this coming in 2014. And how do I communicate that? How do I communicate the sense that you're not going to be 9 to 5 in one place? There again, 9 to 5 has
very
gone
long.
away,
Yeah.
right? So like you suddenly start seeing every time I say a phrase, that phrase is no longer true. And here we are literally 10 years later, right? And it's already no longer true. So how much more would it not be true in 2050? So I started pulling together this grid, this matrix, and I said, okay, what are the things that were true in my world? What are the things I took for granted and accepted as truisms? Like you work hard, you stay in one place, you have loyalty, you get a pension plan, you grow old, you die, right? And I started like dissecting each one of those. And I said, well, when was it true that people had pension plans? Did you have pension plans as when you were in the agricultural era? And I realized, no, you didn't. If you were a landowner, you owned the land. If you were a tiller or like, worked on the farm, depending on how benevolent your landlord was, you had that probably for a multi-generational home on condition you worked the land. And so there was a different version of pension. Pension was having more children.
Right.
And that's why we had the large families, right? The more children you had who might survive into adulthood, the more chance there was someone to look after you as you aged. And the whole concept pension plans just literally came in the 1930s, right? So all the things that in my age group, take for true are really not that old. And so that's when I started delving into history and saying, okay, so what was true in history? And I realized that one of the reason we're moving into a different era is that our essential frameworks are being literally messed with.
Mm-hmm.
So we just talked about like, pension plans and things like that. If you break it down, our sense of time has shifted. Like in the agricultural era, our day was the sun goes up, the sun goes down. Like the cow did not care that it was Sunday, right? And still needed to be milked. Your calendar was the crop cycle. And then we come into the industrial era and now we're run on clocks and calendars, right? Very different model.
Like machines.
Yes. And I started doing this, like transportation was, the horse and carriage. Now transportation is everything from a car to a rocket, right? And it's like, and you start going down these paths and you're like, all right, they're messing with my frameworks. But when frameworks repurpose or frameworks resettle, that's an era change. It's no longer we're moving from an manual typewriter to an electric typewriter. That's a technical shift. This is a societal shift. And so, yeah, and it's one that is actually going to be multi-generational. It actually took over 200 years for the first patent to be filed for the industrial era, the steam engine patent, to the 1930s when pension plans came in. So to me, that was kind of like the official end of the agricultural era, because now we were fully in the industrial era. But that was a 200 something year gap. That was like 8 generations. So there were people who lived and died in that gap, and we're launching into that. And that is actually that is the other core pillar of my work, because I don't think enough people talk about this sense of displacement and this sense of unease, and how it takes a different character to be able to handle this constant sense of something's changing, something's changing, something's changing.
I think that's a really important point that there is, especially in our country right now, with the state of politics and the upcoming election and climate change and all of the disasters that have happened recently, is that there is an underlying anxiety about things being out of our control. And it's not just our lives feel like they're out of control. And what I'm interested in exploring a little bit with you now is how the trajectory of your life has made you a different person. I won't say stronger, but focused in a way that is bigger than yourself. It's just not, what am I going to do when I'm 70? But it takes a broader perspective. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about your background and the kinds of hurdles, not only once you left the financial world, but in growing up, in your experience of where you ran into obstacles to really feeling, we use the word happy a lot in this podcast, but really feeling like you're on the right track, and where you've come up against obstacles in your life, with your family, with your upbringing, you moved to Canada at a young age. I think I remember, but you can tell me a little bit more about that because I may have it mixed up. But what I'm interested in is the personal challenges that you have come up against as you've made this transition to a much more global perspective of what you are focusing on.
Okay. And I kind of, when you frame it like that, I begin to see my life history or my life story in a different way. Um, okay. I think I'll start off with the fact that I probably have a very different risk profile from the average person.
Mm.
And I have a different sense of, I think I play with opportunity slightly differently from other people.
How so?
Um, and So I came to England when I was younger. So I actually started off life in Uganda and got caught up in the Uganda crisis, which is Idi Amin when he expelled all the Asians and gave them 3 months to leave the country. And what that did is, and I think I would have been an incredibly different person if that had not happened to me. So I it was an incredibly traumatic event, but it
And you were how old?
reshaped. I was 10.
Wow.
Actually, I was 9.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's like so the first decade of my life. And my father had been born in Uganda. I'd been born in Uganda. So it's like this seemed like where our family tree was going to settle for the foreseeable future. And to actually have that uprooted from beneath you, and then like, now you're literally thrust to the wind. Um, I was fortunate in that we had a family home in India and my grandmother was there. So that's why my father took us and left us there. We were 6 children, and my father was in his late 40s. So here he was. He'd been a school principal. He was incredibly well respected, kind of like a pivotal person in this in society. Well, I won't say in society per se, but like he was well known and well respected. And now he's like, who am I? I mean, when you
Right.
talk about who
Nobody.
am I, right? This is
Yeah.
like one of the ultimates. It's like you're in your late 40s, everything you've built up, you've got nothing to show for it. Like you don't even have any paperwork to show who you have been, except for the reputation amongst your students, right? And he was fortunate in that he'd actually done his postgrad and education degree out of the University of London. So he actually had one piece of paper that he could draw on. A lot of other school principals that I know didn't even have that. And at that age had to go back and retrain into different careers because they had nothing to prove. All this career that they'd built up, all this career that they'd lived, all this, this intellectual and emotional and social capital that they'd had. And like I was only a decade old. We're six kids under the age of 10. And penny by penny, my father earned enough airfare to bring us over to London. And like uh, we weren't officially refugees because we were not coming in on the refugee planes. So we didn't have access to all that pipeline that existed to other people. My parents lived, I mean, I'm really lucky. And they showed me how to come back from zero.
Mm.
And I think that experience at such a young age taught me a lot of things. First of all, it taught me the power of community because we could not have existed or survived without the generosity of the people around us, our immediate family. First of all, my grandmother, we literally lived off the widow's pension that my grandmother was bringing in.
Mm.
Six children, his wife, and my father was earning peanuts in England, but like the at home I lived my first, most of my teenage years in hand-me-downs. My aunts would give the dresses to my mom. My mom would, pull it apart, resew it, create something new, and that's what I lived in. But it's that generosity uh, that allowed me to know that if you have that, you can come back from zero in terms of
Mm.
cash, right? That support, that net. When I use the word network, net is the part that I focus on. It's not the networking part. It's like, who am I to support you in what you want to do? So that has always been a core part of my identity. And I totally give blessings that this happened. Because the other thing it did for me was it gave me a relationship with my grandmother. So my youngest sibling was literally just born, and I had a couple of siblings who were not too well. So my mom was very focused on them. And so my grandmother and I would pretty much run the house, right? And so I got a really great relationship with my grandmother, walking with her to church, digging holes. Like she'd teach me how to plant things, how to sew, like all these little things. As a 10 to 15-year-old, I learned at her elbow, if you like. Also picked up a lot of her quite conservative attitudes, which I've had to work at. But that is the structure behind. What she also did for me there then was gave me a really strong sense of genealogy of her path, who had come before her, and also of the land. Like I began to appreciate how regenerative the earth is. And I think when you see me talk about climate, that is the root. That is the root. That
Mm.
is where this seed was planted, is this appreciation and love and value in the abundance of the earth. Just walking by paddy fields, watching them grow. I don't think I would have had that growing up in London. And so I think a very different version of me showed up because of my life journey. And I think, like I said, one of the core ones is, you know what? Shit happens. Excuse my French. If your listeners don't listen to that. But it's like, life does not give you what you want all the time. And what do you do next? And so the next time that happened to me was I was applying to go to medical school. And at the time I did, there was a really strict quota on women applying to medical school. And my grades were not as good as they should have been. So I could have been in that group if I'd worked 17 times harder. I didn't. But yeah, I didn't make it into medical school. And I ended up going in for psychology. I picked psychology. But I hadn't done math as one of my core subjects. We have a very different education system in England, and my A levels were biology, chemistry, physics, no math. And you needed math for psychology because so much of it is statistics.
Yeah.
So I had to do math 101 as in my first semester at university. And I came in under the eye of a gentleman who was just launching computing as 10% of this math 101. And he looked at me and goes, you just have the most logical mind. And not only that, he says, I'm watching everyone around you. You're clearly the youngest in the class, but you're teaching everybody else how to use the computer. It seems to come naturally to you. And it did. It's like I didn't see anything weird about what I was doing. And he says, you passed math 101, and I'll see if I can pop you into the second year of math and computing. And he did. And that switch out of psychology into math and computing allowed me to then work on Wall Street, which, is a whole nother career. So like, I think what I have learned is that, there have been doors open to me. Someone said it to me a couple of years ago. It's like they were open to you and you said yes. So
Mhm.
there's a combination of I happened to come in at the right moment. I happened to have a certain amount of my own intellectual capital that I brought to the picture, or I had the right attitude, but I also took risk. I also said, yes, let me give this a shot. And I think those two things probably hopefully answer the question you had, which is like, why do you think like this? So I
Well,
could go on, but I think that's enough.
what I'm hearing are qualities that have taken you from adversity and obstacles into the next phase of your life with
Mhm.
not so much deliberate planning. I'm going to do this so I can have that, but there was a recognition, and please tell me if I'm uh, putting something on you that isn't true, but that you recognized how to move through obstacles and adversities at a young age so that when you got older and you were confronted with various obstacles and questions about who am I now if my children are grown and what's my role? Is it simply work or retirement? But that you had a foundation that was given to you by your family and your family upbringing in which you were able to use that as the means by which you stepped into each different phase of your life. And the reason I think that's important is because, and I think you touched on this by talking about how change is happening so quickly now, is that we forget what we have learned as we grew up. We forget
Mhm.
the resilience that we have developed. We forget the truths that have been instilled in us that are not dependent on external circumstances. And pardon me, going into the next phase of life with the dramatic occurrences that are happening so fast, I think those are the kinds of things we need to remember that we have to rely on because it's
Mhm.
so easy to say, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Rather than saying what you're referring to is going back and saying, okay, what do I have? What are
Yeah.
my resources that
What
I
can I
already
rely on?
have? What can I rely on now
Yeah.
to take the next step forward? And in your efforts, your focus to impart that to people who are, well, not so young anymore because Gen Z is up to 60 now. Is that about
No,
right?
no, Gen Z is under the age of 30. So they're
Okay,
anyone
so
born
then,
1995, from
okay,
1995 onwards to
so
1995 to 2010 is Gen Z.
okay, so that generation is as in need of this kind of
Yeah.
support as those of us who are over 50, who are over
Yep.
60, who are
Yeah.
even over 70, because there are many, many, many
Change. Yeah.
talented women who are saying, what do I do now?
Hmm.
So, can you speak to that question of what do I do now that I am maybe 60, 50, 65? How do I think about this next phase of my life? What can I rely on in myself that's going to get me through whatever is coming next?
Okay. I'm actually going to first take it back a little bit to the advice I give parents right now, and very much your picture about change being so rapid. The metaphor I was using was it's like coming into choppy water. So like you've been sailing along quite happily, everything, you had your sails up and everything's under your control. You can steer and everything else. But now you hit a storm and you have a couple of choices when you're in that storm, right? And um, what I kept thinking was we are coming into incredibly stormy waters. We can't predict the size of the waves that are coming at our children. We can't tell where the next wave is coming from. How do I give my child that skill set to navigate that wave? And similarly, whether
Yeah.
your child could be someone who's 50, 60, 80 years
You
old,
could be the child.
I could be the child, right?
Right.
And I kept thinking it's anchors. It's the depth of your anchor that stabilizes you.
Mm. Say
And
more
so when
about
I
that.
start talking about skill sets, in my work, you will hear this constant reference to what I call heirloom skills. And so I think it's no accident that over the last 10 years, every single child's report has this huge emphasis on EQ skills. But if you translate every single one of those EQ skills, it's something your great grandparents had without their PhDs. It is every single one of them, like communication skills, critical thinking, um, every problem solving. These are things that they
Empathy.
had.
Yeah.
Empathy, exactly. These are things that they had that allowed them to navigate oceans, and they did not have. And I keep coming back to they did not have a PhD. So does my child need a PhD in order to have this skill? No. And I started reframing it as an heirloom skill. And I say the more they were used by your ancestors and polished lovingly and handed down to you, the brighter they shine. And when I talk about my grandmother, this is literally where it comes from. It's like, I watched her family history, I watched her story. She's the one who gave me resilience. My parents are the ones who've given me resilience, right? And it's like, if I can give that to my child, within the next 10 generations of my family, someone's going to be on Mars, right? It's like, there again, every single framework that I take for granted is gone. What will they use in order to survive on Mars as a community? Right? They have commuted across this vast space. What will they have? Is it their PhD that's going to allow them to live, or is it these EQ skills, these heirloom skills that will give them the skill set to create community, to create something new, to be able to survive day 1 to day 5? And so that is what I look at. And so I think EQ skills are really strong indicators, some way of anchoring yourself. Faith is in of a lot of people is another one, right? So these heirloom skills, I mean, I watched it with my parents, right? You lose your partner. Suddenly everything you've held true for 60 years is no longer there. And you have to make a huge life transition. Or you have your partner and you have to move to a new home because now you're in assisted living. That's an incredibly dramatic change at that stage of your life, where the coffee pot is not where you expect it to be, like your ladles are now in another place and you have to readjust. And I think if we can look to the lessons or the learnings of our ancestors, lean into our EQ skills, into our heirloom skills, that is probably where you might find a little bit of initial enough support, enough anchoring that you can then pull your way back.
So
Because in the end,
I
it is you.
excuse me for interrupting. What
Go ahead.
I'm wondering is, what about the people, the women who don't have that, who've had maybe their grandparents didn't survive
Hmm.
long enough for them to get their wisdom, or they had a family where everyone was disconnected.
Yeah.
Where do they turn? What do they reach for?
I don't know if I'm if I have the right answers for that one. Um, I'd say look to the things within themselves that have given them constancy. So,
Mhm.
for instance, every time I moved countries or continents, for me, it was always music. I'd join a choir because to me, that was a universal language. I didn't have to learn a new way of speaking, a new way, like the language of music was universal. So, I think look within yourselves and say, okay, what has always brought me that sense of center, right? It could be books, it could be reaching out and supporting somebody else. So it could be inward looking or it could be outward looking. But I think each of us, if we were to think back long enough, finds that moment where we're like, yeah, that's when I knew. Like
That's
for me, the
me.
sunrise literally the sunrise and sunset for me center me.
Hmm.
And I find that, that reminds me, okay, I'm given a fresh 24 hours. I can go mess up again or make something nice. God's gifted me with another 24. But it's like things like that, maybe. I mean, that's speaking for myself. I would hate to offer that advice to somebody, or like, not hate to. That's the advice that I would probably, from my position, offer somebody else,
Well, I think,
recognizing totally the benefit that I have in the history and the family that I have. So.
sure. I think that everything that you're saying is that is pointing to the fact that there are ways that we can learn how to take our next step. If
Hmm.
we draw, whether it's from our biological family, our ancestors, or whether it's drawn from various wisdom teaching
Hmm.
of what's important and what really matters. It seems to me that many times, and I think this is showing up in the work that you're doing, we get to a point where what do we do now?
Hmm.
How do I address this change? How do I address that change? How do I address the change of my identity?
Yeah.
I'm not this person, or maybe I am this label. I've done this role, I've
Yeah.
done this role, I've done this role, but now what? And your emphasis on going back to what has really rooted and grounded us and kept us upright
Yeah.
is
I, I
really
want
important.
I want to I want to rephrase that a little bit because it's not returning to who you were. It's anchoring yourself in who you were.
Mm.
And I think that is probably one of the issues that we're having in society right now is that we want to return to who we were, and that's impossible. Times have changed, circumstances have changed. That is an impossible ask. But understanding who you were as in that space. And I think, you talked about being older women in particular who are now, what can we do? There are two really crucial opportunities that exist in front of us, especially at the age we were and the lifespan we have ahead of us. There's a dramatic need for community, intergenerational community right now. I talked earlier about mental health crises in the younger generations. Much of that is because of the screens. But screens can be community. You and I develop most of our relationship over screens,
Yeah.
right? And I've only physically met you a couple of times. I still consider you an incredibly close friend. That friendship had nothing to do with meeting you in person. It was about a relationship that we created. And I think if we can expand, like take those opportunities as the elders in society and show people that that is possible, that an individual is a community, is part of a net. I think that would be
Yeah.
very, very useful. But coming back to this whole idea of now we're in a new world, right? So it's like using the core, that anchor, to be able to pull yourself into the new world is kind of what I think I want to say. And that, like I said, is one of the most important 21st century skills we can teach our young children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, whoever you have around you, or neighbors, kids, or teach, volunteering in schools or whatever it is. But that is a skill, this sense of being at ease with unease, because
Yes.
that is this I think we've done ourselves a disservice to say, like, you do this and then everything will be okay. That whole Hollywood ending is where everything went to pot, as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. It's like, but if we say, you do this, you get married, and the day after you get married, guess what? You still got to do the dishes. You still got to like fold the clothes. Like nothing, no fairies show up and do everything for you just because you got a ring on your finger, right? So it's like there's always the day after, the happily ever after. And so that is, I think, the sense that we need to impart, that we need to move away a little bit from the fairy tale and this, perfect everything after kind of sense. But it does take work and people have to do the work.
Well said. There's no getting around it. There's, you can call it work, you can call it exploration, whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it, but that ability to be at ease with unease,
Yeah.
that is a brilliant, brilliant phrase. And if our listeners only take that one phrase away, that I think that will serve them really well. So, as we come to a close, before we do, can you tell people where to find you? Because you have a lot to say and you've been sharing it with the world. So, share it with us.
Oh, thank you. I think the easiest places to find me if you're on LinkedIn, I'm under the name Karena de Souza, and that'll be in the show notes because it's spelled Karena. And because my name is so interestingly misspelt so often. I actually go under the phrase tilt the future, T-I-L-T. So tilt the future. And that is my pitch to say, in any circumstance, you actually have agency to actually move the delta and move the vector and move towards the way you want to be. So I have a podcast under that, which exists, but more actively, I have a Substack. So tiltthefuture.substack.com is where you'll find me writing weekly. And I'd happily have more subscribers, but I like engaged subscribers, people who are willing to get in on the comments and push back on me, because I think pushback is a great way that I learn. So
Terrific. Terrific. Well, thank you again so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I
Excuse me. And
always
I,
enjoy speaking with you, Nina.
well, thank you. And I hope that those who are watching or listening have gotten some of these nuggets that Karina has shared with us today. So thank you so much for those of you out there, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye for
Thank you.
now.